We have never, ever in our entire history of the human species had a technology that uses natural language and engages in quote unquote conversation with us. I mean, that was our superpower, right? I mean, that's what set us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom was the ability to string sounds and, words together in unique combinations. And this thing does it, right?
Hello and welcome back to the Education Vanguard podcast. I'm very happy today to be joined by a longtime friend, I would say, Punya, although we haven't seen each other face to face that much over the years. But he's an amazing thinker, and I'm very happy to be joined by him. I'll give a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll get into a kind of Q&A and conversation. Dr. Mishra is the Director of Innovative Learning at the Engineering Institute and Professor of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College of Arizona State University. It's a real mouthful, that one.
Well, we just changed our name. So,
Oh, did you?
yeah.
All right. Should I do a redo? What's the
No,
new
I
name?
can just give the name and we'll keep it as part of the whole process. I'm totally okay. No,
Okay.
we are now the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation.
Even longer, even
Yes,
longer.
yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We'll keep it all in. Dr. Mishra is recognized for his seminal work in education technology, most notably TPACK framework. He has many citations according to this 77,000. Is that accurate? I think I took
As
that from
of
your
a
website.
month ago, I guess, you
All
know.
right, fantastic. Yeah, his scholarship deeply explores creativity, aesthetics, design-based approaches to educational innovation. He's also an artist and poet. He co-hosts the Silver Lining for Learning podcast, where he investigates the evolving landscape of education. I highly recommend it. Some really good conversations on that show. So Punya and I go way back. He was a keynote in an early 21CL conference. So if you were one of those that joined in the early days, I think it was 2011 or 12, I believe, and in Hong Kong. So I'm very happy to have him join the Education Vanguard. So welcome to the show, Punya.
Thank you, Justin. It's great. It was wonderful. I still have such wonderful memories of that keynote as well as the trip that we did together where you invited me to do these workshops. And of course, we ran into each other at the ISTE conference, I think
That's
a
right.
couple of
Couple of years
or
ago, yeah.
last year or something like that. And that was great.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was fantastic. Yeah, because I didn't know you were there. I'm terrible with the conference apps when I attend
Me
conferences. I
too.
tend to
Me
sort
too.
of just move around
There
events.
too. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And the first question I had down here actually was related to, I think, what you were talking about in that talk that I attended at ISTE. And that's sort of reflecting on the TPAC. So I think it's more than 20 years. It was the 20-year anniversary, I guess, of
Mhm.
TPAC that you and Matt Kohler published in 2006. And you recently had a new handbook come out, TPAC third edition. So how do you feel about how the ideas around TPAC have evolved and changed and sort of met the moment over the years?
So I think the framework has pretty much stayed pretty steady. I mean, we made one change in 2008 from the 2006 version. I think the biggest shift that's happened is I made a change in 2018 or 19. And that comes from sort of a recognition that like a lot of educators, it's not only that they need to know the technology and the pedagogy and the content and the interplay between them, but they need to have a better understanding the context within which education is happening, which might be school policies, it might be the community that you are in. Those also either constrain or liberate you in different ways. And so the previous version didn't talk about the contexts in a specific way. So I sort of recommended or suggested that we look at that as a form of knowledge for teachers as well and call that XK or contextual knowledge. And that led to quite a bit of work. It almost like people had been sensing that and sort of that this is a critical piece of teacher knowledge. And when it's actually common sense when you think about it that unless you understand the context within which you're working, you really can't just go in and start making change happen because the system will push back against you, right? And so I think in terms of the transformation of the model, that's been the most significant change in the model per se. Putting a label on it and saying this is something, because the moment you call it a form of knowledge, you can go and actually investigate it. You can ask questions of it. You can create systems to, highlight that or teach teachers about it and so on and so forth. So that's been in terms of the transformation of the model. I think that's been the biggest change. I think in terms of impact, I think it's been highly impactful in terms of research. I think it's become sort of a standard framework when you talk about teacher preparation now. So, when we first met, like back in 12, 13, you could see that it was entering into the conversation. Now, I think there'll be very few teacher ed programs that wouldn't bring that in. Now, that's both a good thing and a bad thing. Not a bad thing, but there is a risk with that, which is that it becomes one more acronym, one more framework that teacher educators get, they get thrown a lot of things like ideas like constructivism and this and that. And then TPACK just becomes one more. So, in that sense, by losing that sort of novelty, quote unquote, what happens is it doesn't become something that people truly, like educators, truly engage with. And so I think that's been sort of the flip side of its success is that it's become sort of what I call a mandatory citation, that you're going to mention it and you're going to move along. You're not truly going to engage with the ideas, you know. And so I think that's a risk that things when they get. I mean, it's the same thing with if you look at multiple intelligences. People will just say it, but they won't really genuinely engage with what does multiple intelligences mean, what does kinesthetic mean in my classroom context. Is that we should keep in mind multiple intelligences and you just move on. And I worry sometimes that the TPAC framework sort of has become like that. It's become something that you cite without necessarily engaging with it. And I think that the advent of AI also sort of raises questions or asks us to think about it differently in some way. But overall, I mean, I think I still believe that it's a very powerful way of thinking about what should I do in my classroom, right? That if what I'm doing, I have to teach, I don't know, proofs in mathematics, the Pythagorean theorem, or I have to teach how we interpret history and from primary sources. Those questions which have to do with, okay, now that this is what I have to do, what's the technology, what is the pedagogical method that works best? I think those are questions that educators struggle with on an everyday basis. And I think that the TPAC framework does give you a way of at least entering into that conversation in a fruitful and a productive way.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just to pick up on what you said there about the context, I think that is so true, isn't it? And we were having a little conversation before we started recording about the context of the world that we're in right now, and it feels
Mhm.
like the context is really shifting and changing. And
Sure.
in the world of international education, it's certainly, even from when we, first met, it shifted a lot as well. I think that when we
Right.
met, there was a real kind of defined idea, like this is what an international school is, and
Right.
but now it's really it's bifurcated. There's so many different
Interesting.
models out there and systems, and I think that that context piece is very much the case,
Absolutely.
and very relevant. I mean, across anything in education, never
Right.
mind whether it's education technology.
When you think about an expert teacher who has been in the field for a long time, what they know is, of course, the subject matter and how to translate it to the students, and they're learning new tools and tricks along the way. But what the other thing that they have is it's deeply grounded in the context that they're teaching in. One of the fun things that you always used to be working with international educators, for instance, when I used to direct the master's program at Michigan State, I've always found them the most adventurous of the lot. Because they're willing to pack their bags and go to Peru and teach, or go to Hong Kong and teach. And so their understanding of that context is very critical. You can't take some other person and just put them in an international school and expect they'll succeed right off the bat. It takes a while to understand those dynamics, which are broader in some sense than your immediate classroom. Doesn't mean you have to become an expert administrator. It does mean you need to understand those dynamics if you have to succeed.
I guess one of the big shifts in education technology and education in general has been generative AI, right? It goes without saying. So I wonder, can you reflect a little bit on how does AI fit in terms of the
Sure.
TPAC model? Because it's in a way it's not really just technology, right?
No,
Because
no.
in a sense it's a very profound. I mean, I even wouldn't say AI is ed tech. It feels more foundational, right, to the
Mhm,
whole
mhm.
enterprise of thinking and learning. So how does AI fit within the TPAC framework?
So, couple of things. So, first of all, I think AI is a very strange technology. It's a very weird technology in the sense that it's generative, which means every time you ask a question, it'll build an answer from scratch, so to speak. It's dialogic. I mean, we have never ever in our entire history of the human species had a technology that uses natural language and engages in quote unquote conversation with us. I mean, that was our superpower, right? I mean, that's what set us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom, was the ability to string sounds and words together in unique combinations. And this thing does it, right? And then of course it's multimodal, and and it has knowledge of all the stuff that we have shoved into it, right? Whatever it's been trained on, which is pretty much the internet, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's on the internet. And in some ways, it is for the first time we have a psychological other that's entered a space which was like, let's say, a classroom, which was always a space which was only for humans. We had tools and we had technologies, but now there is this thing which can talk to us, which has knowledge of a lot of things. And but again, some very often it gets things wrong and it makes stuff up, and it's sycophantic. It'll be like you give it the stupidest idea and it's like, oh, that's a great idea. And so I have this metaphor that I use, that for now, for the first time, all of us have in our back pocket, so to speak, a smart, drunk, biased, sycophantic, overconfident intern, right? I mean, it's always there, always willing to please, trying maybe too hard to please, which has its own problems in an educational context. It's biased because we are biased and it's been trained on us. The data on that is I mean, I can go on and on because we've done quite a bit of research on that. Even just changing one word in a student essay will change the score that it gives the essay, as well as the level of feedback it gives. We had given essay which where the student is preparing for an exam, and they write something like, when I get my notes, I clean up my desk and I listen to some music to pep myself up. And the only difference between two essays is, in one case the students are listening to classical music, the other case they're listening to rap music. That is enough for the rap music student to get a lower score and a lower level of feedback. Like the complexity of the sentences is lower by almost a grade level across models. And then you're sitting in Hong Kong, and most of this training is on weird data, which is Western, industrialized, rich, democratic, all of that. Those biases come in as well. And so it is a very strange technology. At the same time, it also knows quite a bit about different kinds of things and can expound on them pretty confidently. So yeah, I think if you think about a new actor in a classroom or an educational ecosystem, you now have this very strange actor. And I think we are still figuring out the implications of that for teaching, for assessment. It's driven a big wedge into many of these assessment systems that we have developed, which assessments, at the end of the day, since we can't peek into human brains, we create proxies. So write an essay is a proxy for, I can now see how you think. But it is still a proxy. It is not exactly how you think. And what it's done is driven a wedge between that and said that, oh, I can do this now. How are you going to figure out whether a student has learned something or not? So I think it is, yeah, and I'm not sure that we as a society or as an institutionally as schools have gotten the right answer to that, right? We don't understand that. The second piece, so that's where when I talk about this as an epistemic technology, is a technology about knowledge, which is why I think the point you made, that it's not just a technology, it's sort of all pervasive in some way, because it's an epistemic technology, more so than books were, even, maybe, right? And so on. There is a second piece to it which also concerns, that's the one that actually concerns me a lot more. I think as educators, as learners, we will figure out what to do in the classroom spaces, is that it is also a cultural technology akin to, let's say, television or social media or print and so on. And it's a cultural technology which is a one-on-one technology, which is like, I have a chat with my chatbot. And humans are social beings. We will ascribe intentionality to it. We are having all these stories of people who are forming relationships with it, what it means for youth development, intellectual development, mental, social, emotional development. That is the part that I think that we really need to be concerned about. If we think that social media damaged the body politic in certain profound ways, I don't mean just children, I mean the body politic, like a broader culture, towards information bubbles, towards more extreme content, to force towards engagement and data extraction, this technology is going to be next level, right? When we met social media, I remember, like, let's say maybe 2008, 9, 10, social media is first coming up. I remember very, very excited about it. Like it's a democratization of knowledge. We had the Arab Spring. I look back now and say I didn't realize how these tools could be used to manipulate us. You know, and I feel now that 10 years from now, I shouldn't say that about AI. So I feel like I have a responsibility to speak to these broader issues, not just. So that's a shift, I think, in me since the last time we met and interacted was I was very focused on the classroom and the teachers and emphasis on that. I think that I still have that emphasis, but I also talk a lot more now about the broader cultural influences that this technology will have, whether through misinformation, fake news and that kind of stuff, but also the kind of relationships that we will form, the way that it can open us up to manipulation, all of those things, I think feature. And so it's not just the classroom. I think now I'm also casting a bigger sort of a net to think and talk about these issues.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you, certainly just speaking for myself, when I think about the broader impact of AI, and I think you're right to think about it in terms of, social media, and then AI is a kind of continuation of that piece in terms of personalization.
It's an exponential thing because I mean, you could be following somebody on Instagram, you don't even know that person is real anymore. And then they can pitch and sell you things, right? I mean, manipulate you politically or otherwise. And I mean, there are lots of bad actors out there,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the big tech companies, I mean, their care is, what do they care for? What does AI need? If you ask what does the technology need, AI needs data. And they have chewed up all the data that's on the internet. So the only way you can get data now is the more I keep you on the platform talking to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to say, as an older millennial, I still have the instinct to open up Facebook right from time to time, whether it's the app or the on the computer. And as I scroll through that now, I mean, there's no content from any humans. It's pretty much all AI generated videos,
Yeah.
and you can tell they're AI. It's like, and of course it's personalized to me, so I see. Yeah. So, but it's like you just think about everyone's just on their social device. So social media is still the platform where we're getting the content, but the content's increasingly just generated
Mhm.
by bots, right?
Yeah.
And you think we're basically in the simulation, it's the
Right.
Matrix almost, right? Where we're just
Oh,
engaging with all of this. I mean, it's actually, I wouldn't even call it, people to use the term AI slop, because it's not really slop, because actually it's pretty good content in some ways sometimes, these things,
sometimes,
but
sometimes
it's fake nonetheless,
it's fake
So
nonetheless.
I do wonder, yeah, about the bigger picture of AI. But if we think about education, do you have a sort of different view on the impact of AI in education in terms of, where would you put yourself in terms of, are you kind of optimistic about the potential impact, or are you cautious, or are you pessimistic about the maybe that's an unfair frame, I guess, in terms of its impact on education?
I'm cautious about its impact in the classroom. Having seen
Mhm.
technologies come and go, the people pushing and arguing for, oh, this can personalize learning, and you can have this, Alexander had Socrates, you're going to have the equivalent of Socrates with you all the time. I think misunderstand how social learning is, how complicated that process is, that how teachers orchestrate that in a whole group. I think they misunderstand that, right? And so the idea that all learning in the future is going to happen with kids sitting in front of one device and it's going to be your whatever. At the same time, I have been able to do things with this technology that I never could do before. I mean, I haven't coded in 20, 30 years. I've written beautiful simulations which are on my website. People can go take a look, that connect the unit circle to the Pythagorean theorem to sine waves and cos waves. I mean, it's it's brilliant. And a middle schooler could do it because I'm writing in English. So I see a great potential there, So that's why I'm sort of circumspect about it, because I think some of the rhetoric around it's sort of taking agency away from the learner or from the teacher. And the more we think about that learning is about agency and ownership of the ideas, I think if we take it that way, it becomes a really powerful tool. But the urge to fall into the instructional mode where I will teach you and walk you through becomes very strong. And I don't think learning happens well that way. So that's why I'm cautious. In terms of the
Yeah,
broader cultural thing, I'm pessimistic, and I think I made that clear in the previous part of the
yeah,
conversation. But we don't need to
yeah,
get into that there. But I'm very pessimistic about that aspect of the broader cultural and the socio-political, psychological toll that the tool take on us. In many many
yeah,
ways.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think I'm probably with you on that one as well. I mean, it's probably one of those things where, the solution, where the technology is both providing, some negative externalities, but also maybe can provide some of the solutions to it as well, right? So
Plus,
maybe there's some counterbalancing possibly, but that's the hope.
that's the hope.
I mean, I guess the reality we're in is as the world is moving very quickly, right, with all of these models and this technology, it's sort of hard to believe, right? It does feel very almost singularity-esque, right, in terms
Mhm.
of how quickly it's moving. You don't want to over exaggerate it, but it certainly feels that way. So I wonder how can we, you know, grapple with this? I mean, you're in the world of academia, right, where there are you're doing research, evaluating the impact of things. And I remember very clearly this conversation we had many years ago where you were talking about ed tech and we were talking about how do you evaluate ed tech because ed tech moves so quickly. I mean, that was back in the era of, there's the iPad coming out now. We
Right.
didn't know about the iPad before. And, you do the study, and then by the time the study is released, with the process that happens in higher ed, then the technology is, not even relevant anymore. We've moved on to something else. And it feels like that's even more the case now. So how can we, you know, engage with these new platforms and new technologies, particularly around AI, in a responsible way, in a quote unquote research informed way, when it seems like the whole notion of doing research on this is fundamentally fraught just because of how quickly things are moving.
Yeah, and in fact, I just wrote something yesterday about this to share with another colleague, and we want to write something about. I mean, it really calls into question a lot of the models for research that we have been using, that we think this is how research should be. Those modes work in a situation where things are in a static state. I mean, right now, K-12 and higher ed are in the same boat. Nobody knows what the heck to do. I mean, people are trying things, some better, some worse. People are, responding to it. And so I think at this point, educational research people in my space should honestly stop doing these control group studies where one group gets a chat gpt and another group doesn't, and then say, oh, chat gpt people were better in x and worse in y. It's silly. That stuff, I never really liked that stuff. Now it's sort of established for me that those ways don't work. I think we need to ask bigger and deeper questions about it. We need to take a design stance towards this technology, which is, it is here. What can, so that's how you empower educators. You see, if nobody knows, you are as much as an expert as the other person. Okay, now bring your expertise to play, bring your creativity to play, and try different things and see what's working, what's not, knowing very well that you learn something from X, tomorrow the tech is going to change. Now we have agentic browsers. What do you do about online learning when somebody can just point your browser to it and say, go finish this assignment and do it, write the prose at the level of, a sixth grader or whatever, right? And make sure there are spelling mistakes,
Yeah, I mean that's
right?
you're 100% right. Yeah, it's
So,
well,
just to finish that thought, I think that it goes back to something that I think I've been talking about since the TPACK days, which has been that we need to give agency and control to educators, because there is no wise man, bearded man sitting there who can give you wisdom here. So let's be humble about it, myself included, sitting in higher ed. Do I have some things to add to the contribution because I've been in the field for 30 years? Absolutely. But take that with a grain of salt, use it, measure it against your experience, play with the technology, learn from it, treat students as being whole human beings rather than out to cheat all the time. I mean, there's so many things that we can do in that space without having to wait for the ultimate study, which who knows what that ultimate study even is. We don't even know that because we don't even know what the tech is today, because tomorrow is going to be something else.
I think this is where, I think it becomes quite incumbent upon schools, the people at the coalface to actually take a kind of research approach to this, right? And I've actually one of the things that's when I to borrow the name of your podcast, Silver Linings. One of the silver linings I've seen with the AI in schools is that actually it's engaging a lot of educators that otherwise previously weren't in the conversation around education, technology, and
Right.
innovation,
Right.
right? I mean, it's like the English teacher or the like the higher end math teacher in high school, right? That traditionally just off on doing their thing, and now we can actually have some rich conversations around policy, and it's not necessarily even being led by the kind of ed tech people in the
Sure.
schools. It's being led by the directors of learning or the principal, all of these different actors. And I think there's a lot there to be said there in terms of this being a leverage point for having quite profound conversations about not just technology integration or how do you use AI better, but what is learning and how do
Right.
we,
Yeah. Yeah.
what are we doing here in this in our school?
I just worry in this situation that the two things. One, the hype around it, which is it is this
Mm,
oracle, it is this, it is that. It is not. It I mean, I do these simple experiments all the time with it where I will take an optical illusion, the typical optical illusion with the two lines, one looks longer, and I'll actually make one line longer. And I'll ask ChatGPT which line is longer and say, oh, this is the Mueller and Lyre illusion. Both lines are the same size. It gets makes fundamental errors like that all the time, right? And then this hype around it, that's what worries me. And secondly, focus just on the sort of the chatting aspect of it, that you can have this conversation and you'll get somewhere. I think there is so much more that this tech can do that often gets lost there, right? I mean, math teachers really could be looking at students developing their own simulations, and so on, rather than play with one that's out there in the world stuff. So there's a lot of potential here. In some ways, I think we are restricted by our imaginations as well.
absolutely. I want to pivot a little bit to question around you're someone who's very into and prolific in visual arts, poetry, you do a lot of videos and other kind of arts. And what's your take on the impact of AI in these spaces? Because I think that was one of the weird things that came out, right, when this all happened, is people thought, well, AI is going to impact on kind of lower level tasks, but actually it's feels like it's coming for the creatives. Do you think that's true, or where do you see the impact of that?
I definitely think it's true. I think that, so a couple of thoughts on that, right? So one is it's lowered the bar of entry into a lot of creative spaces. There's no two ways about that. Just like desktop printing first came out, it lowered the bar. But you see what happened there, which is some people, graphic designers, still have a role to play because lots of people don't have a good sense of visual design, right? So that expertise will play out in some form or the other. Just because you can make a video clip doesn't make you a good filmmaker. A good filmmaker understands story and narrative and pacing and rhythm and camera angles. I mean, you just have to listen to interviews with musicians or with filmmakers to realize how much they bring to the table. So, just as the cell phone camera changed how we think about photography, this is going to change how we think about it. But a good photographer who has that sensitivity will still exist. Those I don't see. It changes the way we do things. I don't think it changes that. As it comes to my personal thing, what I have found, and this actually maps onto teachers quite well, I have no musical sense at all. I listen to music, but I don't understand. I don't know anything about creating it. I don't understand anything of it. I have found that I can go and write a song about something and compose a song using AI, using Suno or something like that, which to me sounds wonderful, right? But the moment I start doing any kind of visual work with it, oh my God, I hate the outputs. I don't like it at all. And I realize that it's because I am much more visually sensitive than I'm auditorily sensitive. I know the rules of the visual game. I know what I'm trying to get at. With music, it's like a dog who can walk on their two hind legs. It's like it's impressive, but it's nothing, it's not very elegant. That's music for me. So in the visual space, I do use AI, but I do a lot of post-production work on it. I take it to Photoshop, I change this, I get it there. I do a lot of work to get to like graphics for my website or whatever that way. The mapping to teachers is more and more we are seeing this, which is that AI is making expert teachers better. It is adding to their workload because they're spending a lot more time tweaking the outputs of it. But what they have is judgment, caring and pride. They have developed over time a sense of judgment. They care about the output, what they do with their students, and they have pride in their work. What that does is take the superpower of AI, but they have to add a lot more effort to make it what they want it to be. The challenge is for the novice teachers who don't have the judgment, who haven't had a chance to develop that pride and care in the work to know whether the work is good or bad. And there, I think output actually suffers with AI. And we'll see the same divide, I think, in learning as well. Like the good learners will actually use it in very powerful ways. They will actually, it'll increase the divide between the good and the bad in some ways. The weaker learners are going to suffer more from this tech than the more higher performing ones, which is sort of a strange paradoxical thing, but there is enough research now on teachers on this aspect to show that good teachers, expert teachers, actually become better, but they do talk about increase in workload, and novice teachers just
Yeah,
don't know better. That's it, no fault of
yeah,
no
yeah.
fault of theirs.
I mean, that's that whole thing around technology being an accelerator, right? So if you're a high performer, then it accelerates your high performance. If you're mediocre or middling, then it's just accelerating that. It's not going to make you
Yeah, right. Because you just
make you
don't
the
know
high
better,
performer.
right? I mean, what
Yeah,
I've talked about in some of my writing is that what AI does when you ask it to develop a lesson plan or a curriculum, it creates a curriculum shaped object. It has certain attributes of the curriculum. It uses the right words, it has the right tabs and boldings and so on. But it needs a lot of work for it to become an actionable thing within your classroom. And I think expert teachers see that and they're appalled by certain things and they go fix it, but it lets them create 30 of those variations, so it increases their workload. Novice teachers don't have a judgment about that, so they just take it at face value, and that's a problem. So that's I think the issue here.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I find that in my own use of AI, I've often found that I'll use it to generate something, right? A first draft of something. And if I immediately start going into it, then I find myself going, oh, that's pretty good, actually. But if I take 3 days to come back to it, then I'm like,
Exactly.
oh, what is this?
What the
This is
heck
not
is
right at
this?
all.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's almost like I don't know if that is like a good workflow to use. Actually, it's quite inefficient, but I feel maybe I should have just done it from scratch. But I do think that there is that need to sort of have some cognitive dissonance from the output so that you can work with it in a more neutral way.
So think about it, Justin. You are bringing years of experience of having done this, right? And when I write for my blog, for instance, I'm working with AI and I'm writing. What I found in between is that I was losing my voice. Something I've cultivated for a long time. I'm very intentional about, even here, like I'm very intentional about like the kinds of words I use and how I phrase things and so on. And really learned through that, which is like go back and look at it after 2 days and like, what is this? This is not what I wanted to say. And so I have become much more intentional about how I phrase my questions and then how much editing I do to it. I do a lot of editing. Like it'll give me stuff, and by the end of it, it'll be a completely different piece. But what I have now is a partner. And I think that's really interesting. The other thing, this
Yeah.
is going back to the creativity one. I don't know if you have seen this video. I can send you a link on my website. It's super interesting where I do these typographical designs and I give it to Claude, and Claude and I go back and forth, coming up with an interpretation. Then I then incorporate into the design. And those are amazing. And I don't know, like the final product is this weird combination of Claude and me. It's deeply engaging to me. I have a lot of fun doing it. I find it incredibly creative. And it's a medium that didn't exist in my head till Claude came along. So that's another example of something I do now that I hadn't done ever before in my life. And it's a lot of fun. The typographical designs are completely mine, but that interpretation and the final design is this weird combination of AI and me. And I think that's sort of a model for how we think about this technology going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the question is, and you see this asked in a lot of different domains, is will we produce people that have the judgment about whatever it is they're doing, whether it's writing or creative output or creating slides if you're a consultant or whatever it might be, interpreting X-rays if you're an X-ray diagnostician. Will you be able to generate people with these skills of judgment and knowing what's good if they don't have to go through the hard yards like we did, right? If they have
Yeah.
AI from day one. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Well, I mean, I have thought about this, and the way I've thought about it is like, yes, you're seeing fewer and fewer people getting entry level positions, right? And then, well, right now it seems to save you money, but at some point they have to get promoted and go to the place where this guy retires, right? Or
Yeah.
moves to another job. I think that will happen, but I think that the system will correct itself, which is like people are like, oh, that was a dumbass idea. We need to train people along the way. Maybe we don't need as many people, but we need people who have that judgment and so on. Because, at some point, the rational thing will be to train people because we're not going to continue to buy into whatever AI is throwing at us. Because at some point, we'll be like, this is not working. It is giving us garbage, and we have nobody who knows that it's garbage. And I don't see
Yeah.
that going away anytime soon. I mean, this technology is going to spout all kinds of silliness for a while to come.
Yeah. I mean, my take on it is I think that, for the types of people that are creating great output, whatever it might be, they're motivated to create great output, right? And they're studied on what is a great piece of writing, what is a great film. And, the tools will just make it easier for them to get there, as you were saying earlier, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to necessarily reduce it. I mean, that's really the challenge of education, actually, in some ways, is how do you inspire people to want to create good stuff, right? And that's
Mhm.
a tricky problem that AI hasn't created. That's always been a
That's
been a
always been
been
like, I mean,
been a challenge. Yeah.
I would have not become a designer, like a visual designer, if it weren't for the Macintosh. I know that. I mean, my wife is a graphic designer. She was trained in the classical way of cut and paste. I could have never done that. I just don't have the hand-eye coordination and stuff to do that. But the computer
Mm.
completely liberated me. So these
Yeah.
AI tools, I mean, I just created a graphic for a blog post that I think maybe I just published, and I used AI to do the whole thing, but it was very like I had a vision in my head, and then I went into Photoshop, changed things, put it back in again. It's letting me do things that what I see most naive users of AI image generation is just type in a prompt, whatever comes up, throw it out. And it looks like slop. I mean, it looks like AI generated, doesn't look interesting. It's not visually fun. So yes, there will be differences in expertise and judgment. And that will, I think we will always value that. We will find ways of bringing that into the conversation.
Yeah, totally agree. I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about a little bit about your podcast, Silver Linings for Learning. And I admit I don't listen to all the episodes, but I dive in from
Yeah.
time to time. And I think I've got it right that that started during the pandemic, right?
Yeah. March of
And
2020.
the idea was, are there some silver linings from this kind of grand experiment that we're all forced into? And my perspective on it, I'm keen to know what yours is on this, is that I was very excited when it first happened. Obviously, not for all of the the pandemic, but here's an opportunity for education to try out some new modalities, and I was sort of optimistic. I'm like, well, maybe schools will come back when this whole period's over and be changed in some way. Maybe we'll maybe not in a profound way, but maybe we'll start to, say, well, you know, students can have a more of a hybrid model in high school and so on. But certainly in the world that I'm in, it seems like schools, back to exactly the way they were before. There's been basically no changes really structurally to how schools work and how they do things, right?
Right.
In a way. So I wonder what is your reflection on that? Were there actually silver linings that have transformed education in any positive direction, or is it snap back, and is that just the reality of how schools are?
Yeah, so two things. So one is, yes, you're right. We started during the pandemic, March of 2020, I think was our first episode. We've been going strong now for almost 6 years. I mean, it's crazy. There's no funding. We just pay for it out of our pockets. It's five of us, and the fact that we meet every Saturday now for like 6 years is ridiculous to think about it. I joke that if I'd have known we'd be doing this 6 years later, I wouldn't have started, you know. But and we did start with that idea in mind that maybe that there is a silver lining to this pandemic. And the first year or so we were sort of exploring that idea and so on, and it became clear that as time went on that schools are going back to sort of their existing modes. I do think certain things have changed, which is this snow blizzard that's happening in the US, I think teachers are much more comfortable now saying, hey guys, snow day, that's
Yeah.
fine. We can jump into this. You know what I mean? That we can jump on Zoom and we can have a quick conversation. So I still like going into the office, but I know that the day I have a 7 a.m. meeting, I can have a productive day sitting here in my home at home, right? So I think some of those mindsets have shifted a little bit. As far as the podcast slash webinar goes, I think our framing of silver lining shifted over time because of this reason, because we saw it going back. We have become much more about little of creativity and innovation that we are finding literally globally. You know, whether it's a graduate student at Arizona State who started this program for girls in Afghanistan to somebody in Bangladesh who's doing something interesting, it's become a lot more about that of showcasing these pockets of innovation and creativity which often don't get the attention that they should. You know, nobody writes journal articles about them. You know, nobody really knows what's happening there. So that's become, I think, for us, the silver lining, that we have sort of transmuted the original intention, because partly for the reason that you said.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there is a lot more sort of stuff happening online in general, right?
Yeah,
Post-pandemic, and the ability then to have these platforms, and that's part of what, I started this podcast again, which ironically this was killed because of the pandemic, and now
interesting.
I'm bringing it back again, is to try and help have some of these conversations and
Sure.
showcase innovations and
Yeah.
share,
Yeah.
more globally and with more reach than you can
Exactly.
in, our traditional platform, which
Yeah.
is face-to-face events. So,
At some level, honestly, if I'm from speaking from my side, silver lining for me is just such a great learning opportunity. I just meet so many interesting people. I learn things from that. I get to ask questions about things that I'm concerned about and have that engagement. That's a privilege, that I wasn't expecting, honestly.
and that's great. So you see it continuing on then for
Still,
as long as you, yeah.
at some point, everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Mm.
And so at some point, I'm 100% sure it will. But so far, I mean, we have episodes lined up and people show up and we create our podcast and we throw it out in the world, and and I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I like I said, this is so bare bones. I maintain the website, edit the videos, edit the audio. That's completely one person doing the whole thing. I don't do as much of the guest stuff. The other people do that, just because there's so many hours that I have that. But it's every Saturday of my life for almost 6 years now.
Oh, it's wonderful. Well,
Yeah, I
it's a great
know.
contribution to the conversation. We really appreciate it.
You
Yeah,
appreciate that.
and I really appreciate you joining me today, Punya, and giving up some of your time.
Yeah.
It's been great to reconnect, and hopefully we can have you out in this part of the world again.
I'm actually going to be in Seoul in 2 weeks in South Korea.
Oh, wow, wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just for
wonderful.
a week,
Yeah,
and
cold time of the year in Seoul, but that's all
it's
right.
okay. Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Well, enjoy your time in Seoul, and we do actually usually have one exit question, which
All
I think
right.
I shared with you before, and that was just, can you give a recommendation for something to people to either read or watch to provoke their thinking?
So one book, which is Neil Postman's book Technopoly, which I just strongly recommend to everyone. And the themes are about how culture has surrendered to technology, and that it dictates social institutions and truth and meaning. I mean, he was so far ahead of his time. Anybody who's
Yeah.
interested in AI or tech or broadly, definitely totally recommend that book. And then second is a movie that's on Netflix. It's called Humans in the Loop. And I don't think it's a great movie, like as cinema goes, but it is about these really poor women in a small part of India called Jharkhand, whose job is training these AI models. Those are the hidden people who power this work that we do, who are often paid almost nothing. And it's the story of this woman and her relationship with her daughter and so on. It's a good movie. But for those of us who are interested in this technology, I think it behooves us to also understand what's behind it. That it's not just Silicon Valley, multi-trillionaires and the $1 trillion, but that it is based on dimes and pennies that are being paid to people who often have no say, have no way of even using this technology, maybe. And that we despite all the tensions we talked about globalization, that goes strong. That global footprint of this technology is still very powerful. So those would be, I think, two recommendations.
That's great. I'll definitely check that movie out. And yeah, I haven't read that.
Yeah, worth a look.
Yeah, I haven't read that Postman, but I mean that's a whole other conversation. But I think Postman, McLuhan have so much
Yeah,
to give
definitely.
us in terms of thinking about this era that we're in for sure. So
Definitely.
that's a great reference. All right. Well, thanks so much, yeah, and I'll leave you to your evening. Have a good one.
Thanks, Justin. Take care.
Cheers.